Today, thank you. So today we're having Ryan Grant from Michigan Environment, Great Lakes and Energy Water Resources Division talking to us about Industrial Stormwater Program. Jennifer, if you want to do a little bit more complete introduction, since you know Ryan a little bit closer.
I can do that. I can definitely do that. And I see how you're waiting for Mark. And just as a backstory, Mark was like so adamant about this topic and this topic of conversation. So it's sad to me that he's not here to relive his experience from the Michigan Environmental Compliance Conference that we had. I don't even know, when was this, like a year ago, Ryan, or more? It was like right after the pandemic started.
It's on the slide, Jennifer.
Is it?
Yeah, September 21st.
Dude, I can't see that. I need glasses really bad.
It's been a full year.
It's been a while. I know, it's crazy how time flies. So Ryan and I, a little interesting story about Ryan. So he has been working in the department for over 15 years. I've been working here now closer to 25 years. So we've known each other since he started working here, which is crazy. And he I live in a really small town, and I always tell you guys it's like the pot capital of Michigan right now, which is, you know, maybe we're getting that taken away from us, that moniker or that award. But Ryan lives like the next town over. So like if you're driving on the highway from Grand Rapids to Detroit and you pass my exit, which is exit 52, his exit is like the next exit. So
actually it's the same exit.
Do you get off at 52?
Yeah, I go south. I don't want to head towards the pot capital.
He can't take it. He can't even be around us. So we have known each other for a while, and we actually used to work in Grand Rapids together for probably at least 10 years, maybe longer than that. So,
I think so.
Anyway, yep, it's been a while. So Ryan's great. He's actually, just to give him a little quick kudos, he's definitely one of our go-to speakers when it comes to talking about industrial stormwater. He does a lot of our trainings, and he really has a good in with the stakeholder groups. So it's really great to have him be able to give these conversations to people, especially people who are just kind of coming into it. So I won't pat you on the back any longer, Ryan. I'll let you take it away. And hopefully Mark will be able to join us. I'm glad we're recording this, so he'll be able to watch it later if he doesn't end up getting on. But go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
And Ryan, we certainly appreciate you being able to join us. I know that you had a emergency come up in April, I think it was, when we last planned this. So I'm glad we were able to reschedule it.
Yeah, you should talk a little bit about that emergency if you can, like in 2 minutes, because it was really interesting. What constitutes industrial stormwater emergency?
Well, let's just say it was, I won't go into any true specifics, but it was a food processing facility, and they had a situation with their waste management lagoon that they ended up losing significant volumes of wastewater to one of the trout streams here in northern Michigan. So turned out to be a several week cleanup. I mean, it was just crazy that it happened on the day I was scheduled to give this talk. But yeah, so it was quite a significant event, pretty significant resource damage, but everything's cleaned up at the moment, and hopefully they're towing the line from here on out, but we'll see, time will tell. So, but anyways, I appreciate giving this talk. As it was stated, I gave this at the Michigan Environmental Compliance Conference, and really it's a general overview of industrial stormwater regulations, and kind of gives a rundown on does industrial stormwater, how do you know if industrial stormwater applies to a particular facility? And I guess with that, we'll jump right on into it. I guess I've been doing industrial stormwater for the state of Michigan for a little more than 15 years. So I am the industrial stormwater coordinator for the department, Water Resources Division, and we have several district offices across the state with compliance staff. I also do compliance for the Grand Rapids District Office. So 9 counties in Michigan, roughly 400 permittees that I do inspections at. So let's see here if the slide, there it goes. Okay. So if you guys have sat through other industrial stormwater presentations, you're probably going to hear a lot of similarities. This is a federal program, and we have to be at least as stringent as the federal rules. So there are some, some minor differences in the way we run our industrial stormwater program, but it's really all based on the federal rules. So, the industrial stormwater permit program, the intent is to reduce and eliminate pollutants that are discharged to surface waters of the state from industrial facilities during storm event discharges. And the program does that by controlling pollutants at the source by implementing what we call best management practices. And in our permit, those best management practices are called non-structural and structural controls. The Industrial Stormwater Program has been a federal program since 1987. And since in 1994, the department was authorized to carry out the federal rules through Part 31 of our National Resource and Environmental Protection Act. And so therefore we issue our own permits, carry out compliance activities and enforcement actions in regards to the Industrial Stormwater Program. So permit applicability, like I said, this kind of gives you a rundown of trying to determine whether or not a facility is regulated by the industrial stormwater rules. And really it's a 3-step process, or there's 3 questions that need to be asked. And the first one is the standard industrial classification code or primary activity federally regulated? And the second one, and we're going to go into more detail in each one of these questions in the future slides here. So the second question is, does stormwater from the property discharge to surface waters of the state? And the third question, is there exposure of industrial materials and or activities to stormwater runoff? So SIC codes and primary activities, if you're unfamiliar with that term, standard industrial classification is a coding system that several agencies use, federal, state, local municipalities, but it's a way for industries to give a code to what their industrial activity is. And really, they use it to identify in most cases, to the federal government on their federal taxes. It basically identifies what generates the most revenue for that particular industrial facility. Now, in the stormwater program, we evaluate the primary activity. What is what is creating the most revenue, or in some cases, what activity at the facility employs the majority of the workers? And really, there's no agency that actually tells a facility what their code is. Really, it's up to the company to identify their specific code. So sometimes in our program, we kind of go back and forth with companies, and I don't want to use the term argue, but sometimes we interpret their activity a little bit different than how they interpret it, and so sometimes there is a little back and forth there. The other part of this, if there are some industrial activities that aren't specifically regulated in the rules by their SIC code, but by their narrative description, and really that's the industrial activity that's occurring at the facility, and it's described by narrative. So wastewater treatment plants, steam electric power generating facilities, landfills, generally they're going to have SIC codes that are not listed in the federal rules, but they're pulled into them specifically by their narrative description of their industrial activity.
Hey, Ron?
And yeah.
You had a question come up, Sarah?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
That's fine. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
This is Sarah Johnson from Region 1, and I'm in New Hampshire. And we had an issue with marinas versus marine dealers with the
Yeah.
Conservation Law Foundation. Are you familiar with the whole debacle with them?
Not familiar with it, but I can see
Okay.
where you're going with it, because you've got
Yes.
a variety of different marina operations, and sometimes they want to be, I think, yacht basins or yacht clubs and versus a marina. So I don't know
Well,
the specifics, but go ahead.
what happened was they we hosted workshops with EPA, and EPA agreed that most of the marinas were able to not have to follow stormwater regulations because they truly were marine dealer first. They were making 60 to 70% of their money out of selling boats, and they did repair work on the side and some winterizing on the side. And a lot of the shops that I personally worked with actually were pretty close to non-exposure because nobody was storing oil or antifreeze or anything outside, or they even had a boat washing station that was hooked up to the sewer. I mean, so they really were, there's nothing out there other than boats that are winterized outside, covered and stuff like that. So the Conservation Law Foundation didn't like that. They felt like they had to apply to the stormwater rules and went after them in a civil court proceeding and made them follow the stormwater rules, and EPA refused to get involved. Oh, another caveat to that, New Hampshire is not a delegated state for stormwater. It's done out of region EPA one. So that's why they went after New Hampshire marinas and not, in Mass. I think Massachusetts too, Michelle, if you're on here. So I love the idea of the SIC codes, but it didn't work. They went after companies that didn't really need to follow the stormwater rules and were doing their part. Not all of them, don't get me wrong. Some of them need to do some work. But I find that we need to come up with a better way to define who is under these SIC codes and really, because it was awful. It was a lot of money spent, a lot of mess and all sorts of stuff. And I don't know, is there other way to figure out what your SIC code is and make it more, I don't know, finalized? And I know tax code isn't the way to go. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Well, I sit in on Region 5 monthly meetings, and I know the state of Minnesota brought the same thing up. And, I've heard other states and some sectors, they'll go back and forth on whether it's a regulated SIC code or not. And I guess in Michigan, for marinas, I haven't had too much pushback from the industry as to whether or not they're regulated. I guess, under the transportation sector, they're only regulated if they have vehicle service shops. So a lot of our marinas, the ones that are under permit, they have a dedicated service shop on site, and they also have boat washing activities that take place. And the big issue that we have in Michigan is dealing with that boat wash discharge, and it's not authorized under the industrial stormwater permit. Some of the facilities have been able to install structural controls in the catch basin at the haul out well to where they can, through the authorization from our local wastewater treatment plants, been able to divert that water once it's been pre-treated, just filtered out the solids and that kind of thing, and able to discharge it to the sanitary system or wastewater treatment plant. We haven't had a real big pushback over the years from marinas in regards to like what you're talking about. I haven't had
the other issue we're having is the fueling stations, because they're above water on the dock.
Yeah. And the fueling, I guess retail fueling alone isn't going to pull them in to the permitting program. So those marinas that just have retail fuel operations aren't permitted through our program. Just really the ones that have actual service shops and boat washing activities. And ultimately, usually if they're that big, they're going to have fueling operations. So then that just falls under the umbrella of the industrial stormwater permit. But if it's just, let's say just a marina with, rented slips, and just out of a courtesy, they have retail fueling, those are not going to be under our permit because we feel they don't meet the narrative description as it relates to the transportation sector. I don't know if that.
It does. It answers it a little bit. We're a small state. If we took delegation of some things, it would make things easier, or we can pick and choose a little bit better. EPA is not really doing much, but no one's enforcing that stuff up here anyways in New Hampshire. Very, very, very little, trust me. CLF did bring light to some of the issues, but they also went after salvage yards, lumber yards. They've made a lot of money going after all these little guys, and it was all small businesses. So it was tough to swallow, and very helpless to help them, since we're not a delegated state for stormwater. So I had nothing. I had an EPA didn't help, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not going to say every marina that's regulated has a permit in the state. That usually they don't come knocking on our door asking for permits, and it's usually, we have to stumble across them. And we just don't have the resources to continuously go out there seeking permits from these operations. But I know that there is a variety of different types of, I would say, marina operations, and really, we've focused in regards to permitting the ones that we feel meet the narrative description, and usually it's the service garage or the service shop, and the boat washing activities. And if they have retail fueling, then that just pulls them in as well. If they have those vehicle servicing activities at the facility. So.
Nancy had a comment on this in relation to the 6X rule, where EPA does use the SIC as a identity applicability, but I think that's very specific to that rule, and there's like 3 levels to that as to whether 6X applies or not. So I definitely understand where, unfortunately, the water realm is a little bit more not as concrete in terms of primary SIC codes.
Okay, I don't know if I even have a response to that, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I don't know what'd you say, the 6?
Yeah, so it's an air rule.
Okay.
Totally outside your area, but we're just like comparing a little bit there.
Yeah,
Okay.
and this is Nancy, and my point was there that it is good to use SIC codes for applicability. It's very helpful. In Sarah's case, it kind of sounds like it's an interpretation from her region, and maybe that's a little different from what you, Ryan, in Region 5, the way you're interpreting SIC. And so that was kind of my point. SIC codes can work really well and be very helpful in determining applicability.
Gotcha. Any other questions or comments on SIC code before we move on? All right. So the next step is determining whether or not the facility has a discharge of stormwater to surface waters of the state. And surface waters of the state, include rivers, lakes, streams, and wetlands. So in order to make that determination, the facility is going to have to do a site drainage investigation. And a lot of times what they're going to be doing is they're going to be assessing whether or not they have storm drains on site. And then they're going to have to look at the laterals. And are those laterals conveying stormwater either to a separate storm sewer system or, like in this case, through some structural controls or detention basins and discharging directly to the nearby creek, in this case being Buck Creek. Now in Michigan, we do have some municipalities that have combined sewerage systems where we have sanitary and stormwater that discharge through the same infrastructure. And for those facilities that are on serviced by combined systems, the industrial stormwater permit from the state of Michigan isn't applicable. They'll be regulated by the municipality that owns and operates that system. But most of our communities do have separate storm sewer systems, but it's really up to the facility to, when they're doing their assessment, to, you know, kind of do the legwork to see if they are serviced by a combined or a separate storm sewer system. Now, is that, Nancy, is that a question, or I see a yellow box around? Is that what I missed before? All right, I'll take that as a no. There's also a number of facilities that have ponds on site to manage their stormwater. And there's a difference between a detention pond and a retention pond, and it's important for those facilities to understand the difference, because a lot of times these terms get used interchangeably. A detention basin or pond, as we see it, does discharge stormwater from the site at a given flow rate, and a retention pond does not discharge. It retains that stormwater on site, and that stormwater is either designed to infiltrate or just evaporate, but there's no connection to a storm sewer system, a separate storm sewer system, or to surface waters of the state. So facilities that have retention basins, we're going to consider them not having a discharge to surface waters of the state, so therefore an NPDES discharge permit isn't needed for those types of facilities that manage their stormwater in a retention basin. All right, the third step is evaluating exposure, and exposure is going to be you know, industrial materials or activities that are performed, or materials being stored outside the facility, and it's going to come into contact with either snow or rainwater. And the next couple slides, I just kind of run through some of the common exposure issues and that our inspectors run through or see on site at some of these industrial facilities. So a lot of facilities manage their waste in compactors or these roll-off containers or lugger boxes. And, you know, we're going to be looking, the exposure here is going to be the spillage or poor housekeeping that takes place in these areas. Material handling equipment. So that's going to be a variety of things, from racking or parts baskets, totes, anything that is designed to convey parts that are being manufactured inside the facility. And if they're storing them outside, it's going to be looked at as industrial stormwater exposure. You know, vents, stacks, some woodworking facilities and a variety of other industries will have bag houses to manage the indoor air quality. So if they're going to have bag houses on the exterior of the facility, it's going to be looked at as exposure. And really, one that has come to surface here in the last couple of years in Michigan is air emissions related to PFAS at our cleaning facilities. You know, this is something that generally the exposure pathway is being emitted through stacks, through their air handling, and through deposition. It's falling out on the hard surfaces at the industrial facilities. So this is something that is going to be considered. Any particulates that are going to be exposed as a result of their air handling or their air emission controls. At transportation related facilities, we already talked about marinas, but over the road trucking, any outdoor storage of batteries, any old parts that are ripped off of crash vehicles and stored outside, any brake pads, tires, that kind of thing. Those are all going to be exposure items related to, the transportation sector. And again, here we talk a little bit more about marinas and, over the road trucking, if they have a fueling operation on site, that's going to be considered vehicle maintenance activities. That's going to trigger exposure. Boat washing or vehicle washing at the facility is also going to be looked at as outdoor exposure. And, I already kind of mentioned this, but the industrial stormwater permit does not authorize the discharge of any wash water associated with vehicle washing. And facilities have to come up with some way to appropriately manage that. And either that's, collected and hauled off site by a licensed contractor, or they work out an agreement with the local wastewater treatment plant where they can convey that wastewater to the sanitary system. Plastic injection molding facilities, they're going to have large silos outside, and they get delivery by semi truck or tankers that haul these plastic pellets, and they're difficult to manage. And they're easily transported by stormwater runoff, and are a pretty big issue at these types of industrial sectors. So any spillage of plastic pellets or handling of plastic pellets, so that activity is going to be considered exposure at these types of facilities. Organic materials, sectors that involve the food processing facilities. We've got a number of composting operations, wood chip manufacturers. They all deal with organic materials. And most of the time, these are all piled and stored outdoors, and are, really a challenge to deal. These sites are a challenge to deal with in this program. But as you can imagine, organic materials that are piled outside, they're going to come into contact with rain and snow, and so it's an automatic, determination in regards to exposure. And soil erosion, cementation. So we've got a lot of, we've got gravel pits and landfills and mining operations. All of these types of industries are going to have usually large areas that are exposed, and they need to implement best management practices to deal with any potential off-site discharge of sediment. So if they have exposed soil areas due to on-site earth moving activities, it's going to be considered exposure. All right, so to sum it all up, if all three of those questions, if they all apply, SIC code is regulated, the facility discharges stormwater to surface waters of the state, and they have exposure outside, then they're going to need an NPDES industrial stormwater permit. And in Michigan, we have general permits for industrial stormwater. Therefore, the facility that applies for coverage under a general permit would be issued a certificate of coverage under that general permit. Now, in some cases, for the more complex facilities, maybe like an airport or something like that, we would consider an individual permit if they have unique situations on site that really doesn't fit the mold of let's say, a general permit. But under these permits, and it doesn't matter if there's a general permit or if they have coverage under an individual permit, they would need to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan and implement it. they need to acquire the services of an industrial stormwater certified operator, and that's unique to Michigan. In the federal rules, they talk about a qualified individual overseeing the program, but in Michigan, we've taken it one more step and say, you need to have an individual that is actually certified by the state to have supervision over the stormwater treatment and control measures at your facility. And those are individuals that, actually, I'll go into a little bit more detail. I don't want to skip ahead too far. But next is certify there's no unauthorized discharges. We do have an annual fee of $260 for anybody that has stormwater, industrial stormwater authorization in a permit. And our permits are valid for 5 years. So just some general information, and this is going to be similar, to the EPA regs. But under a stormwater pollution prevention plan, you got to develop a site map. You got to do source identification, basically, assess the industrial operations and determine, what pollutants are exposed to stormwater runoff. And then you're going to have to identify the non-structural controls that will be implemented to reduce the exposure and reduce the concentration of pollutants in the stormwater discharge. And that's going to be, routine site inspections, employee training, material handling procedures. We've got visual assessment of their discharge, those types of things. Those would be non-structural. In addition, they're going to have to implement structural controls, and those could be, for instance, detention basins that we've already kind of went over earlier in the presentation. Could be secondary containment around above ground storage tanks of materials. Could be filters in their stormwater inlets. But basically, structural controls are going to be things that the facility is going to have to construct to either prevent stormwater from coming into contact or divert stormwater around, or to further polish the stormwater per se, like in a detention basin before it's being discharged offsite. And then they've got annual report submittals. So.
Hey, Ryan, stepping back
Yeah.
just a little bit, I had a question come up as to what sector are mulch and composting sites classified under?
So composting would be 20, I'm going off of memory here, 2875. They have, so 2875, let me look at fertilizers and mixing only. If you look at the breakdown underneath that SIC code, there's composting in there. Wood chip manufacturers are 2421, or let me see, 2499. What is that? Or 2499. 2421 is sawmills and planing. So if the wood chips are created or generated at a sawmill, a lot of times that'll be a secondary activity at some sawmills. A lot of times they'll use either they'll sell the wood shavings for bedding at some of the large CAFO operations, but 2499 is just the wood chipper that buys a bunch of, or actually they buy scrap wood or what have you and chip it up. We have some some wood chip facilities that use like old pallets and stuff that they purchase. And then a little information on the certified operator requirements. The industrial stormwater certified operator, they can be a consultant or an employee at the facility that has taken the training that we offer and passed the exam and received the certification number. And prior to COVID, we had trainings in each of the district offices, several times a year. We offered a lot of training dates for folks to come in and take the training. But since COVID, we've pushed a lot of that virtual. So we We do have some YouTube videos. We have a training certification on our application that the applicant has to certify that they viewed our training videos. We did a live webinar that we recorded and offer on our webpage now that they can view as to meet that training component. But then they're also going to have to take an exam and pass it. So they need to get at least 70% correct on the exam and pay the $30 fee to obtain the certification. That certification is good for 5 years, and to renew it, they'll have to take a refresher training and then pay a $95 fee. When they go through the renewal process, they don't have to write an exam again. And unauthorized discharges, I mean, this is going to be anything that isn't stormwater. So it's going to be any other wastewater that a facility just, pumps out their dock bay door to the storm drain, or, hosing down spills from, unloading or loading locations, or any illicit connections from internal floor drains inside some of these buildings. So they, part of the application process is certifying that they assessed their operations and they don't have any unauthorized discharges to the storm sewer system. Now, if all of the criteria that we talked about applies, they have a regulated SIC code and they have a discharge of stormwater to surface water, but they don't have the exposure that we already walked through at their facility, then that facility would be required to submit a no exposure certification. And really all facilities have the option to try and meet the conditions of NEC. Sometimes it's just not practical or not realistic for all facilities, but they do have that option. We work with a lot of facilities to try and manage their materials more effectively to limit the exposure or eliminate it. The no exposure certification, similar to our permits, is valid for 5 years. And really, a lot of this is explaining to folks, because everybody wants a no exposure, but no exposure means that all industrial materials and activities are protected by a storm resistant shelter to prevent exposure to rain, snow, snow melt, and runoff. And so when you look at that description, it's, as you can imagine, some facilities can meet that objective, but a lot of them can't. And then we also get the question, well, can anything be stored outside and still allow you to qualify for no exposure? And there are some conditional exceptions, and really we've followed pretty much the same criteria that EPA has for their no exposure. We also did provide some guidance documents that we put together on our industrial stormwater webpage, and one of them specifically related to container and compactor management in order to meet the condition of no exposure. But there are some exceptions in regards to when facilities store drums, barrels, tanks, and other containers outside, secondary containment structures, above ground storage tanks, lidded leak-proof containers, and that's where we've put some specific guidance together for facilities that manage those items outside, but adequately maintain vehicles and final products. Again, that's it. Really, our conditional exemptions, I want to say they almost verbatim follow the federal no exposure conditions. We didn't stray too far from that. So now the benefit under a no exposure, other than you're not there's no pollutants coming into contact with stormwater discharge from your site, is you don't have to have a certified operator like you would under a permit. You don't have to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan, and there's no annual permit fees associated with a no exposure. Though we really stress to these facilities, because we do routine inspections at these sites you need to maintain the no exposure condition at all times. Just a couple slides on items that are outside that would be in compliance with no exposure certifications. Clean pallets stacked outside that are for the shipment of their final products. Clean meaning visually clean. You know, we're not asking them to, you know, sample their pallets or anything like that. Final products, you know, stored outside, a lot of times assembled. We have a lot of automotive facilities in Michigan, so, you know, their final product to be in a vehicle stored outside is not going to be considered exposure. Covered leak-tight containers. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, we've tried to promote an incentive to facilities to manage those containers. We had a lot of problems with those in the past, and you know, we really pushed them to manage their containers in a leak-tight and covered type container. Compactors with no leaks or spillage. You know, again, we scrutinize those when we do inspections, and we do have a lot of facilities that implement pretty rigid inspections and housekeeping activities to ensure these areas are spotless. So, but then again, we have, you know, a lot of containers. One up in the upper left being food processing facility. You know, you're putting any food product in a compactor and you're squeezing it, you're going to get juices. That's going to be a container that doesn't meet the condition of no exposure and would be actually non-compliant under the permit anyways. Lower right-hand corner there, scrap metal roll-off container. It's got coolants leaking from it and about to enter the storm drain there. Obviously, that's non-compliant under no exposure, but it's also it would be considered non-compliant under a permit as well. So, you know, no permit or no exposure certification is required for a facility if their SIC code is not federally regulated, or they don't discharge stormwater from the property to surface waters of the state. You know, this is an NPDES, surface water discharge program, and if they don't discharge the surface water, then they're not going to be regulated under this program. Couple other kind of interesting permitting scenarios that we commonly come across. One is regarding leased facilities, and the permit obligation is on the regulated activity and not the building owner. So if the business that is leasing the property from a landlord, if their industrial activity is regulated and they have exposure, they're going to need to get the permit. It's not the building owner. Multiple businesses operating out of one building, and that's going to be kind of an example of the picture that's there. We have a lot of repurposing of large buildings where they're going to be like sub-rented. And in that situation, each regulated business would be required to obtain a permit in that scenario. So if all four of those companies, which they are in this particular situation, each one of them have a separate certificate of coverage under the general permit. Multiple buildings. So we do have some companies that have multiple buildings that they operate out of. And if those buildings are contiguous, the properties are contiguous, meaning they're not separated by a public easement, they do have the ability to cover both of those buildings under one certificate of coverage or one permit. However, if they are separated by a public easement, then they wouldn't meet that condition and they would need to have separate certificate of coverages. Auxiliary facilities. This is going to be for those off-site facilities such as maintenance garages, storage yards, warehouses. If they don't have a revenue stream associated with them, and that's kind of how we look at it. If they're under the umbrella of the parent company, and they're associated with that parent company, they're going to assume the SIC code of the parent company. And if that parent company's SIC code is regulated, then that off-site auxiliary facility would be regulated as well. So that gets a little tricky sometimes.
So Ryan,
Yep.
question on leak-proof closed containers.
Yeah.
How do you regulate that at salvage yards?
Well, salvage yards are going to have a permit. I don't know of any salvage yard that's going to have an NEC. So leak-tight covered containers are going to be a requirement to meet the no exposure certification. Under permit, a facility could implement non-structural or structural controls if it's not feasible for them to have a leak-tight or covered container. Are you following me with that?
Yeah, can I follow up on that? Because I have,
Sure can.
that was good. I got something from that. So what about the old semi-truck trailers that they love to use with old wooden floors that may or may not have holes in them? Do we count that? Because some of the things that they put in those trucks are oil-free. And technically, I guess if the top is covered, no precipitation is getting, no rain, no snow is getting in. So are we okay with that?
That's a good question. I haven't scrutinized those storage activities to that degree. Usually if a facility has an old semi-tractor trailer that they're putting all their materials in and utilizing that as a storm-resistant shelter, and I don't see any leaks under it or anything like that, then I'm going to sign off on it. I guess I haven't gone in them and looked to see if, the wood is rotten out or there's cracks in it. I've kind of relied on, visual observation underneath those trailers. If I walk up to it and they say, yeah, we store everything in this trailer, and we're considering it a storm-resistant shelter, if I see, evidence of leakage, then I would question that. If I don't, then I wouldn't.
Well, leakage and past spill are two different things in a salvage yard.
Well,
and
again, in a salvage yard, they're under permit. So when I was talking about the leak-tight covered containers, that was kind of a carrot for those facilities if they manage those containers on site. And that was, a lot of facilities, that's all they have is one container on site. And instead of permitting that facility for that one container, if they can, obtain a leak-tight covered container, then they could meet the condition of no exposure. But on a salvage yard, no salvage yard that I have come across is going to try and meet a no exposure certification. And therefore, they a lot of times have empty containers all over the place. They have, they're gonna be implementing additional management like non-structural management controls and structural management controls to deal with those leaky containers or things that you're referring to, I guess. That's where I was going with it.
all right. Yep. I've been to a lot of salvage yards and they get quite creative, very intelligent. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I never would have thought of that.
Yep.
I actually had a facility who burned his entire property because then he argued out that no water leaves his property.
We have several of those as well, and we actually push facilities in that direction, to tell you the truth. If they can eliminate their stormwater discharge to surface waters of the state, then they opt out. So yeah, we have a number of facilities that have created large berms around their property to prevent the offsite discharge to surface waters of the state. So, we still have the condition where, you can't create a contaminated area under some of our other rules, but we do, I mean, there's a number of salvage yards that have been able to opt out of the permit based on, you know, restructuring, remanaging the site to prevent any offsite discharge to surface water.
Thank you.
Yep. So in summary, facilities need to obtain an NPDES industrial stormwater permit if their SIC code is regulated. They discharge stormwater to surface waters of the state, and they have exposure of industrial materials or activities. And again, this is really my last slide, but you know, we've got a stormwater program, and this is, you know, a lot of compliance assistance documentation to assist with all the rules and regs and sample stormwater pollution prevention plans, templates, that kind of thing. And you know, earlier I talked about our state being broken down into districts, and you know, this photo really shows our various districts that we've broken down the state, and in each district there's an industrial stormwater compliance staff person that those facilities operating in those districts can reach out to for assistance and guidance. So, but really that's the end of my presentation. And I guess, you know, we've already had some real good comments and questions, but if there's any others, lay it on me.
Excellent. Well, we certainly appreciate it, Ryan, and appreciate your time and being able to discuss it with. Jen, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. I was curious if Michigan has always had that certified operator program in place.
Yeah, they have. It was I believe it right from the get-go. You know, we were authorized to start issuing permits in 94, 95, and I wasn't here then. I came in right around 2000, but you know, that program was in place when I got there. So I believe it was right from the get-go.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it would be interested, you know, if you have like metrics from before and after, because that's unique. I've never heard of that before, but.
Yeah, I also like that per year fee. I mean, do you get that every year, or do you have to send people out to actually go get that fee? Because I know we have problems with that kind of stuff.
I know. Well, you know, there's always a percentage that don't pay it, and then you got to put on your bill collector hat. But yeah, that's, you know, we have enough. I mean, we get, I would say, fairly good compliance with that annual fee. We did talk about doing, you know, changing it over to maybe an application fee where, you know, our permits are 5 years. So at the time they submit the application, they just paid the 5 years up front, because it sucks being a bill collector, to tell you the truth. I hate going out there and trying to, you know, get these facilities to pay. But what we've done is, you know, if we have a problematic facility, we just send it to collections. We don't mess around anymore. We used to call them and email them and go out there and say, you got to pay. And now it's, you know, if they're recalcitrant or whatever, we just send it to collections. So let them deal with it.
Crystal, you had a question?
Yeah, I was interested in the certified stormwater trainer or professional as well. I haven't heard of that, and I like the idea. So do most of your small mom and pops just hire someone, or do they go to the training themselves? I don't see that going over well here, but if y'all have had it the entire time, you know, if your facilities have known that's been a requirement for 25 plus years, then I could see where that would fare better.
Yeah, and they're required to have a certified operator listed on their application to even obtain the permit. So.
Oh, okay.
So but, you know, in this day and age, I mean, there's so much turnover. So, you know, it's not uncommon for us to go out and do a compliance inspection and you roll into the site and nobody knows anything about a stormwater permit or anything like that because the certified operator hasn't been there for 2 years or whatever. And then you got to go through that process. Yeah, small mom and pops, I mean, a lot of times they'll have, you know, the building owner or the company owner will be the certified operator. And really, we do have a number of consulting firms in Michigan that offer that service. And, you know, we encourage facilities to have multiple operators for the turnover issue, you know, for retirements, that kind of thing. But, and a lot of our consulting firms will also encourage someone on site to get the training as well. Because we require the certified operator to do the quarterly comprehensive site inspections and the quarterly visual assessment. But then the other routine stuff, inspections, that kind of thing, can be done by, you know, an individual that's been trained by the certified operator to carry out those functions. But yeah, I mean, it's been a requirement. I mean, it's kind of routine. Like I said, we put on a lot of trainings. I'm trying to think of how many people we certify on an annual basis, but it's a lot of effort.
I bet, yeah.
These
I'm
trainings
sure it's
are
almost 1,000 people a year.
Yeah, these trainings are, you know, 3.5 hours. So we've saved a lot of time actually going virtual. Whether that's, you know, how that's gonna impact the compliance at the facilities, I don't know yet. It's kind of early to tell, but I know that, you know, we get a lot of gripe for people having to come into the office to get trained, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback by providing that virtual option. I think going forward, we're going to have a blend. We're going to offer a few in person for those that want to come in and get that face-to-face training. Nowhere near the volume we used to, because we have virtual options out there now. But we're still going to have kind of a blend going forward. So.
Do you have a charge for this training?
It's $30 to obtain the initial certification, and then it's $95 to renew. I know it sounds a little funny. It was supposed to be flipped, but when it went in, when the fee package went in, it went in $95 for the initial certification and $30 for renewal, but it spit out reverse. So I don't know how that happened years ago, but that's how it came out.
So Nancy asked a general question for the group. How many other states do have a certified operator program? Crystal's know that Tennessee does not. Anybody else out there have a certified operator program?
I haven't heard of any others.
Yeah,
I've actually had other regulators from other states come in and sit through the training as a, you know, something that they were looking into, you know, starting to implement in their areas.
In a way, it sounds similar to our smoke school. Tennessee actually offers direct training on visible emissions evaluations, which a lot of states do not. So we get several people from out of state coming in, similar path. Jennifer says that Clark County, Nevada has one for dust control permits, but that's about all she knows about. So as it's 2 o'clock. So Ryan, we very much appreciate your time. Coming up next month, I believe we have a painter training with, Jennifer Wittenberg with the Iowa Waste Reduction Center. We'll be talking about their paint tracker program. Then we will also have in November some comments on printing alliance. December is currently still a little bit up in the air. We were trying to get Emily Anwari from EPA Office of Water to talk about the changes to the Industrial Stormwater General Permit, which, as Ryan has pointed out, there are a lot of states that have direct delegation, but a lot of them still are more or less direct copies of the EPA version. So if we're not able to schedule her during December, because that's the same week as most people will have their Christmas break, we'll try and schedule them in either January or February. So until then, if you have any other questions, please send them to me, and I'll include them on the minutes. But again, thank you.
Yep. Great conversations, guys. Thanks for your time.
All right. Y'all have a great day.